Some performances end with a standing ovation, thunderous applause, bright lights, flowers thrown on stage. Then the curtain falls, the crowd goes home, and the artist walks back into silence. What we rarely see is what happens next: the empty apartment, the unanswered phone, the lonely room where immortal songs were once born. Someone who made millions sway and cry recorded timeless music in lavish studios, only to die alone without a single photo on the wall. Another voice that once shook concert halls faded away in a cheap motel, discovered days later. This is not a story about fame. It is a story about what fame often hides. Tonight, you will meet 10 great souls, artists who gave the world everything, yet were forgotten when the music stopped. Keep your heart strong, because what comes next will stay with you. If any of these names still live in your memory, leave a comment as a final farewell. Chuck Willis, the king who wore the silent crown. He was a style icon before style had a name. The turban, the smooth shoulder sway, the quiet confidence. Chuck Willis made post-war America move to R&B. Songs like CC Rider and It's Too Late climbed the charts, reviving traditional blues and shaping the sound of a generation. For a brief moment, the world listened. In April 1958 in Atlanta, Chuck was already in pain. A severe stomachache kept him curled up in bed for days, but he refused to go to the hospital. He feared canceling his shows. That night, he told his live-in girlfriend, "I just need to rest. I'll be fine tomorrow." It was the last sentence he ever spoke. By morning, he was gone. Chuck was found motionless, one hand pressed against his chest. The diagnosis was simple and brutal: gastric hemorrhage, massive blood loss. On the bedside table lay a notebook filled with unfinished lyrics, songs the world would never hear. Nearby was an unsent letter to his mother, apologizing for not buying her the house he promised. There was no grand funeral, no public memorial. The radio announced his death, then moved on. Chuck Willis died at 30, at the peak of his career. A forgotten genius silenced too soon and too quietly. Jesse Belvin, the angel who sang his final goodbye. He was only 27, yet many believed Jesse Belvin would become the true king of soul. His voice, tender, romantic, and unmistakably black, was powerful enough to soften the brutal edges of segregation. In an era divided by hatred, Jesse sang songs that crossed color lines, and that courage came at a cost. On February 6, 1960, Jesse performed in Little Rock, Arkansas at a historic concert where black and white audiences were allowed to sit together for the first time. Before the show, he received threatening letters demanding he cancel. He sang anyway. That night, his performance of Guess Who felt like a farewell disguised as a love song. After leaving the venue, Jesse, his wife, and his manager drove out of the city. 40 minutes later, their car crashed violently into a roadside post. His wife died instantly. Jesse succumbed to his injuries shortly after. Police ruled it an accident, but reports of brake marks fueled long-standing suspicions within the black community. No one was ever charged. There was no televised funeral, no public apology. Jesse Belvin died quietly, but his voice paved the road for soul music with blood, courage, and a goodbye the world was never meant to hear. Johnny Adams, the canary who sang in the dark. Johnny Adams never chased fame. He chased feeling. Known for a voice so high and delicate it was often compared to a woman's, Johnny could sing gospel, soul, jazz, and blues with haunting ease. Musicians adored him, yet mainstream success always stayed just out of reach. By the late 1990s, Johnny lived alone in a small New Orleans apartment that doubled as his recording studio. Prostate cancer had weakened him, forcing him off the stage. One winter afternoon, a neighbor remembered hearing old music playing through the walls. Then it stopped. They assumed he was sleeping. 3 days later, police broke down the door. Johnny was found seated in a chair, still wearing his sweater and scarf. A CD spun endlessly in the player beside him. There was no suicide note, no family waiting. No one noticed he was gone. His funeral was quiet, attended by a handful of local musicians. No statues, no televised tributes. Johnny Adams sang like an angel, but died like a ghost, leaving behind a voice that still waits patiently for someone willing to truly listen. O.V. Wright, the soul of the South who died in silence. O.V. Wright carried the sound of the American South in his chest. His voice wept, pleaded, and testified like a Sunday sermon soaked in pain. Songs such as A Nickel and a Nail and Ace of Spades made him a giant of Southern soul. But greatness never protected him from hardship. Orphaned young and shaped by poverty, O.V. battled addiction and even spent time in jail. He tried to rebuild his life and career, but the audience had moved on. Records failed. Shows were canceled. Slowly, he disappeared into quiet isolation. In November 1980, neighbors noticed O.V.'s front door had been left ajar for days. When police entered the small Memphis area house, they found him curled up on the sofa, eyes open. An untouched plate of food sat nearby, beside a half-open Bible. He had been dead for more than 36 hours. His heart had simply stopped. There were no farewell concerts, only a modest cremation and late-arriving friends. O.V. Wright once shook the South with his voice. In death, there was only silence and an unfinished hymn left behind. Z.Z. Hill, the last ride that never came home. Z.Z. Hill never chased chart-topping fame. He carried the weight of everyday heartbreak and turned it into soul blues that felt honest and raw. Songs like Down Home Blues and Love Is So Good When You're Stealing It brought blues back to black audiences during the disco era. His voice spoke for people who felt left behind. By the early 1980s, touring had taken its toll. ZZ suffered from serious heart problems, yet he kept performing, sometimes for crowds of only a few dozen people. In April 1984, after a show in Texas, he drove alone toward Dallas. On the freeway, he lost control of the car and crashed into the median. The heart attack came fast. By the time help arrived, he was gone. Rescue workers found a demo tape in his pocket. Maybe he was still chasing one more recording session. There was no major tribute, only a quiet funeral. ZZ Hill died the way he lived, working for the music, never asking for applause. King Floyd, the hitmaker who vanished into silence. In 1970, King Floyd made America move with Groove Me. The song was youthful, infectious, and impossible to ignore. For a brief moment, Floyd sat at the top of the charts, a fresh voice in a changing R&B world. Then the spotlight faded. Later records failed, and King Floyd quietly withdrew from public life. He settled into a small, run-down apartment near New Orleans, living completely alone for years. Neighbors barely knew who he was. They only remembered hearing soft singing through the walls at night. In 2006, when Floyd hadn't been seen for days, the landlord broke down the door. Inside, they found his body. On the table sat an old cassette labeled Groove Me Demo. Prescriptions for diabetes and high blood pressure lay nearby. The coroner ruled his death a stroke. No one noticed until it was too late. A man who once made the nation dance died unnoticed. If Groove Me still moves you, remember the voice that disappeared so quietly. Jackie Moore, the queen the world forgot. Jackie Moore gave a voice to strength, pain, and womanhood in the 1970s. Her hit Precious Precious climbed the charts and wrapped comfort around countless listeners. For a time, she was undeniable. Then the industry turned cold. Record labels called her unmarketable, saying she wasn't young enough anymore. Jackie retreated to a quiet life in Jacksonville, Florida. She stopped appearing in public, but she never stopped singing.
One week, neighbors noticed her lights stayed on day and night. The radio played softly inside her home. When police entered, they found Jackie dead on the sofa, a Bible resting in her hands. An unreleased demo tape sat nearby, proof she was still recording, even when no one asked her to perform. There was no media coverage. Only a few elderly neighbors attended her funeral. Jackie Moore once sang to a generation, and then vanished. Remember her voice. It still deserves to be heard.
Major Lance, the Prince of Soul who died unrecognized. Major Lance once made America dance. With hits like The Monkey Time and he became the bright, joyful face of Chicago soul in the 1960s. His music was playful, youthful, and full of life. For a moment, the streets belonged to him. But as soul gave way to funk and disco, Major was left behind. Alcohol addiction followed, contracts disappeared. By the early 1990s, he lived in poverty, drifting between boarding houses in Atlanta, surviving on welfare and the occasional small club performance where few recognized him. In September 1994, Major Lance was admitted to Grady Memorial Hospital with heart complications. No family came. No manager sat by his bed. A nurse later recalled him asking softly, "Do you know The Monkey Time?" When she nodded, he smiled and said, "I used to sing that. No one remembers." Days later, he died alone in his hospital bed. His name was misspelled on the death certificate. A prince of soul, forgotten even in his final moment.
Melvin Bliss, the man who built hip-hop and was never paid. Melvin Bliss had one song, Synthetic Substitution, in 1973. One song that changed music forever. Its drum break became the backbone of hip-hop, sampled by legends from NWA to Public Enemy to De La Soul. Millions heard it. Almost no one knew his name. Ironically, Melvin never saw the rewards. Royalties never came. Recognition never arrived. For decades, he lived quietly in New York City, avoiding interviews, never performing, carrying the weight of knowing he helped build an empire that forgot him. In 2010, neighbors found Melvin dead in his deteriorating Bronx apartment. He had been gone for days. Police struggled to confirm his identity. A building janitor later said he was quiet, always wore a hat, never talked about success. Among his belongings was a handwritten note. "Music is from God. I am just the messenger." Melvin Bliss created immortality and died in silence, unheard by the world that still dances to his rhythm.
Billy Stewart, the voice that fell into eternal silence. Billy Stewart was impossible to ignore. His explosive, bouncing vocal style turned songs like Summertime into unforgettable performances. He didn't just sing, he attacked every note with fearless originality. But the industry didn't know what to do with someone so different. Despite chart success, Billy faced constant resistance. Racism, body shaming, and a market obsessed with sameness boxed him in. Still, he kept performing. On January 17, 1970, Billy drove to a small gig in South Carolina with 3 band members. The road was slick. Suddenly, his car smashed through a guardrail and plunged into a river. No one survived. Friends later revealed Billy had complained about steering problems days before. The car was never properly inspected. His body was found days later, still wearing his performance jacket. In the trunk lay handwritten sheet music for an unreleased song. No televised funeral, no headlines. Billy Stewart died at 32, a brilliant voice that refused to fit the mold, silenced before the world truly understood him. Billy Stewart, the voice that fell into eternal silence. Billy Stewart was impossible to ignore. His explosive, bouncing vocal style turned songs like Summertime into unforgettable performances. He didn't just sing, he attacked every note with fearless originality. But the industry didn't know what to do with someone so different. Despite chart success,
Billy faced constant resistance. Racism, body shaming, and a market obsessed with sameness boxed him in. Still, he kept performing. On January 17, 1970, Billy drove to a small gig in South Carolina with 3 band members. The road was slick. Suddenly, his car smashed through a guardrail and plunged into a river. No one survived. Friends later revealed Billy had complained about steering problems days before. The car was never properly inspected. His body was found days later, still wearing his performance jacket. In the trunk lay handwritten sheet music for an unreleased song. No televised funeral, no headlines. Billy Stewart died at 32, a brilliant voice that refused to fit the mold, silenced before the world truly understood him.